Live from the campus of Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana Public Broadcasting and the LSU Ideas and Issues Committee are proud to present Debate 91, the governor's race. And now Debate 91 moderator, Robert Collins.
Good evening and welcome to Debate 91, the governor's race. Thanks for joining us. Louisiana Public Broadcasting is proud to sponsor this debate in conjunction with the LSU Ideas and Issues Committee. Tonight we have gathered together the major candidates for governor. Let's meet them right now. Our first candidate is Buddy Roemer. Mr. Roemer is a Republican and, of course, our present governor. Before 1987, Mr. Roemer was elected 4 times as representative from the 4th Congressional District. Our next candidate is Sam Jones. If I could, I'd like to ask those with us here in Baton Rouge to refrain from any applause until all of the candidates are introduced. Our next candidate is Sam Jones. Mr. Jones is a Democrat. He is currently mayor of Franklin. Mr. Jones has been mayor for 9 years. Seated next to Mr. Jones is Fred Dent. Mr. Dent is a Democrat and the former Commissioner of Financial Institutions. Mr. Dent has not held statewide elected office. Next is David Duke. Mr. Duke is a Republican and a state representative from District 81. Mr. Duke previously has made unsuccessful bid for the U.S. Senate. Following Mr. Duke is Edwin Edwards. Mr. Edwards is a Democrat and the only 3-term governor in Louisiana's history. Before that, Mr. Edwards served in both the United States and the Louisiana House of Representatives. And the final candidate is Clyde Holloway. Mr. Holloway is a Republican and has served in the United States House of Representatives for the 8th Congressional District since 1986. Please welcome now the 1991 candidates for governor. Our debate this evening.
There are 6 other candidates in this race. I'd like
if you would, I would ask that you please. All right, excuse me, you're out. Excuse me, you're out of order.
We should not have this unless all the other candidates are here.
We have. Excuse me, we have.
5 minutes for the middle class and the work-oriented poor in this debate.
We have the. The debate this evening will be starting with an opening question to all of the candidates, and that will be in lieu of opening statements. The second round of the debate this evening will be a series of questions from reporters. And the final round will be the candidates this evening who will direct questions to one another. The opening question was provided to the candidates in advance, and it is as follows. Gentlemen, the measure of a person is often calculated by the friends he has or the heroes or heroines he admires. Other than a relative, what contemporary figure do you admire or has the leadership qualities that you would emulate? Please name this person and the reasons you have chosen him or her. Mr. Roemer?
Thanks, Robert. That's a hard act to follow, by the way. There are many heroes and heroines in the world, the men and women who served Louisiana and America in Desert Storm, General Schwarzkopf, they range all the way to Mother Teresa, Leonard Charbert, a senator who died last night, Jack Dolan, both served to the final end with courage. There are many. But I choose a man who lives in Russia, who reminded America what freedom was all about last month. His name is Boris Yeltsin, the president of Russia. He switched parties. He was criticized as a poor politician, but when the iron fist of the coup came down, one man stood on a tank with hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens and tens of thousands of Soviet Army people. And he said, freedom freedom wins. He said, don't turn back the clock. He said, it stops here. He reminded America what makes us different, freedom. He stood for it. One man can make a difference. One Monday morning in Red Square, Boris Yeltsin spoke for every American.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Robert. I have a different view of it. As I thought about who my friends are, I send this out to the people of Louisiana who go to work every day, the working people of this state who struggle, who scrape, who go through the agony of trying to make a living, to pay their bills. The cost of living has risen on them. Their ability to pay has been diminished. The government in Baton Rouge no longer is their friend. The government in Washington is no longer their friend. It used to be that you send your tax money to the government in Washington or in Baton Rouge, and at least you expected them to do a little for you, at least not to hurt you. So my heroes are those who get in their cars every day and drive that drive and go to work, quietly pay their taxes, do the things they're supposed to do, they don't complain, and just ask and expect very little, just for the people they elect to office to do good things by them, but not to hurt them. Since I couldn't include my mother directly in that, I include her indirectly. I'll close it by saying contemporarily, instead of Boris Yeltsin, I like to read Thomas Jefferson. He was the one that really had the courage to get this country started, and he wrote the blueprints for it, and in Russia they're going to use that blueprint before it's over. Thank you.
Mr. Dent.
I have traveled many, many miles in this state during the campaign, and I have met so many people that are my heroes or my heroines, and I would like to particularly comment about those small businesses that are owned by mom and pop ownership that have carried us through the Great Louisiana Depression. And I would like to talk about one such person who, to me, demonstrates not only leadership, but compassion, but love, kindness, and tenacity. His name is Ernest Johnson of Baton Rouge. I met Ernest Johnson when he was trying to acquire a bankrupt, defunct savings and loan. For 3 years, this man attempted to achieve his goal and his dream. He overcame obstacles, big obstacles that were put in his way. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, he did it always with a smile. We started our meetings with his group with a prayer. I asked him, I said, Ernest, why have you done this? He said, you know, Fred, he said, quitters never win and winners never quit. So Ernest Johnson, I salute you for your courage, determination, smile, tenacity, persistence, and also the ability to listen to other people and to learn a lot from those that you listen to. And I, like Sam, would like to add my mother, who was the first woman to run for Louisiana governor. And I'd like to close in her memory as my heroine.
Mr. Duke.
Well, one of my heroes also is Boris Yeltsin. But Governor Roemer, you got to remember, he stood up against the establishment. Ladies and gentlemen, my hero is James Meredith. He's a man who stood up for his civil rights and really the civil rights of all human beings. He was beaten, he was attacked, he was even shot at and wounded for his beliefs. But he also had the courage to change. He began to see that the liberal social welfare system has only created more poverty, more drugs, more crime in our society. He began to see that forced busing has caused more racial tension and hurt educational quality and destroyed our schools. He began to see that the equal rights for which he fought were now being twisted and now being denied to the American majority. Finally, he had the courage, as a black leader, to show up and support me in this election. Not for money, not for fame. That's a lot of courage. That's courage that we need in Louisiana and in the country. He reminds me of a very famous quote. It goes, honor the man with the courage to sink, half his repute for the freedom to think. And when he has thought, be his case strong or weak, will risk the other half for the freedom to speak.
Mr. Edwards.
We live in a day and age when sports figures, entertainment figures, public officials, and members of the clergy disillusion and disappoint many people in America, in part because television and the media thrust them into our living rooms every evening, and we develop a personal relationship with them vicariously. The man that I nominate is like a tree planted by the rivers of water. His leaf withereth not, he bringeth forth fruit, and that which he doeth prospers. Jesus said that a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country. This man, because he does not judge us, because he teaches the true meaning of love, because he practices what he preaches, because he brings comfort and hope to all of us, because he teaches us to live and prepares us to die, is a prophet with honor in his own country. I nominate Billy Graham.
Mr. Holloway.
Other than my mother and father who have meant so much to me, my wife Kathy who is here tonight, other members of my family, teachers both in church and school, I became a Republican because of Barry Goldwater. I ran for Congress because of Ronald Reagan. So I have to say that Ronald Reagan would be the person for me. Do you remember what it was like when Ronald Reagan took office? Our country was in shambles. The nation was drifting. The morale of our military was low, along with the patriotism of our nation. People just didn't think government could work. He took office when America was in trouble, much like Louisiana is now, and really brought the country together. He kept his promises. He held down taxes, and he changed the Supreme Court. Reagan never varied his course. He brought the country together. He was a conservative man, straightforward. He kept his campaign promises. And many of the changes we see today behind the Iron Curtain came about because of what happened during the administration of Ronald Reagan. I'd have to say that he's a person I'd like to be just like.
Gentlemen, thank you. The second round of our debate this evening will be a series of questions by a panel of news reporters, and I would like to introduce them to you now. Our first reporter is Jack Wardlaw. Mr. Wardlaw is the Capitol Bureau Chief for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. Mr. Wardlaw has been in the newspaper business since 1953 and has covered Louisiana politics for the past 20 years. Our next panelist is John Hill. Mr. Hill is the Capitol correspondent for the Shreveport Times and the Monroe News-Star. Next is Karen Nachman. Ms. Nachman is the Capitol correspondent for Louisiana Public Broadcasting. A native of Alexandria, Ms. Nachman has been covering the legislature for 4 years. Our next panelist is Carl Redman. Mr. Redman is the Capitol Bureau Chief for the Baton Rouge State Times Morning Advocate and has been a newspaper journalist for 16 years. And our final panelist this evening is Chevel Johnson. Ms. Johnson is a native of New Orleans, and she works for the Associated Press. This round of questioning will have the reporters directing their questions to one particular candidate. That candidate will have 1 minute to answer. The remaining candidates then will have 45 seconds to respond. Our first question is from Mr. Wardlaw, directed to Mr. Jones.
Mayor Jones, the state faces a budget shortfall of $900 million next year. Please state specifically what you plan to do about it, keeping in mind that more than 60% of the budget is uncuttable. If you talk about budget cuts, where specifically would you cut? And if you raise revenues, be specific on which taxes you would raise.
In 1 minute. When I became mayor of Franklin, my budget from that day to this has been cut in half. I know how to cut budgets. I will not raise taxes. I do not accept the premise that it will be $900 million over budget, maybe $750 million. I do think we should have the temporary tax for 1 more year until we have time to get in it. I think we'll have $200 million plus in new revenues from the lottery and the gaming revenues. But beyond that, cuts have to come from less people and stop duplicating services. I will not, however, do what was done when Governor Roemer got elected and cut the Veterans Office, like the ones in St. Mary Parish. And our worn, torn veterans who really needed that service came to local governments. We put up the money. We kept those offices open, particularly the ones from World War II who really need it now. When we do cuts, we do it with priorities, and we have to take care of the people that are really important and pay their dues to this country.
All right, thank you. Mr. Dent.
When Governor Roemer ran for governor, he talked about scrubbing the budget. What we did not know is he was going to leave an awful lot of suds. The budget between Roemer and Edwards has increased over 37%. 37%. I do not know of a family in Louisiana or a business whose budget has increased 37%. Let me be specific in the answer. We need to consolidate government. And my goal would be, if in fact they are 12 departments, we ought to have 6. We ought to get rid of the office of lieutenant governor. He sits there waiting for the governor to die or be convicted of high crimes and treason. That $250,000 could go someplace else. We ought to take that $96,000 economic development secretary that Buddy hired from somewhere up north and put the office in the office of the governor, make the governor the chief marketing officer of the state. No manipulation of any taxes unless we make the government cut back first.
Mr. Duke.
Again, the budget that Buddy Roemer complained about under Edwin Edwards was $6.7 billion. He used those figures in the last campaign. Now we have a $9.1 billion budget. That's a 37% increase. Massive increase. We don't need new taxes in Louisiana. We need to start controlling spending in Louisiana. And that's what I'll work for. It's about time we get control over our budget. How do we do it? First off, we use attrition. Buddy Roemer, again, when he ran for office, said we could reduce employees 10% a year, not by firing anybody, but simply by not rehiring when people quit, change jobs, die, whatever. We've got to start reducing the employees in state government. We've got to stop wasting the money in state government as well. We've got to consolidate organizations, we've got to consolidate departments, stop the bureaucratic red tape that's destroying business and the working person of Louisiana.
Mr. Edwards.
I'm glad you asked the question because the present governor is going around telling us that the budget is in balance and we have no problems. As a matter of fact, we do. It's somewhere between $700 and $900 million, as you properly point out in your question. We couldn't balance it, but we could help it a lot if we just sent all the out-of-staters that Buddy Roemer brought in here at high salaries and didn't pay people those high salaries. But we're going to have to do some realistic things. Quit deluding the legislature and the people like Buddy Roemer has done for 4 years and tell them that this is a one-year temporary removal of exemptions in the sales tax. That has to be made permanent. He raised the budget $2.5 billion. I don't know who's getting the money, but I'm going to have a good time scrubbing his budget.
Mr. Holloway.
I would like to take an average per capita expenditure of all southern states. In each area that we're higher, I think we have to reduce it to their level. We have to get more for our dollar. We spend more than Tennessee per average. We spend more than Florida per average. This is called normal analysis. It's put together by the National Conference of State Legislators. I think we have to look at it, and we can't spend more dollars than we take in.
Mr. Roemer.
The budget is in balance. It's been in balance 4 years in a row. That's historic for this state. Number two, the deficit you're talking about begins July 1 of 1992. And that $900 million figure includes inflation, which is built in. That's about $300 million. We never allow that. We squeeze it out of the budget. And has over $400 million in so-called temporary taxes that I've tried to the legislature to extend beyond a single year. All we have to do is keep taxes the same, squeeze inflation out, and keep scrubbing. And by the way, we've sold the state airplanes, reduced cars by more than 1,100. We sold the limousines that we found in the mansion. We have scrubbed, and we continue to do it.
Let me ask the audience for your cooperation and to refrain from outbursts. Our next question this evening is from Mr. Hill, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mayor Jones answered the question by saying he'd use part of the lottery money. I just wonder if you're aware that the lottery money is not available until the following fiscal year.
The lottery money as it comes available is what I meant. But, I take issue with what the governor said. The budget has not been balanced, and we've had to balance them in our local governments and had them cut in half. And when they scrubbed the budget, he scrubbed our budget and local governments and all the budgets of the people in this audience.
Thank you. The next question is from Mr. Hill, and it is directed to Mr. Dent.
The out-of-state panel of experts evaluating the Louisiana Teacher Evaluation Program has recommended initial evaluation by the state, followed by local evaluations every 5 years thereafter, in order for teachers to maintain their certification. Should the state be in the business of evaluating teachers? And if so, should the teachers' unions have a voice in the process?
Let me state quickly my view of the teacher evaluation. It cost $6.7 million, got us double zero and a lot of trauma. If the teachers, in fact, are a profession and a noble profession, they ought to be allowed to enter into an agreement on a professional standards committee, much like the CPAs, the architects, the engineers, doctors, and lawyers. Let the teachers fund that themselves with a contribution of $35 to $40, $50 a year. We need evaluation, high standards put on by the state, high criteria, but teaching is more than just standing up in platform performance. John, it is touching the heart and the mind of a child, working with parents, and that's what was missing in this man's so-called evaluation program.
Mr. Duke.
I know we need teacher evaluation. I know that because I saw a teacher strike in New Orleans with some of the picket signs misspelled. But LATEP isn't the answer to that problem. There's no business that could evaluate its employees by evaluating them once a year, 3 hours at a time. You have to have ongoing evaluation for it to be effective. The current program demoralizes good teachers and can protect bad teachers. And I'll use 10 seconds of my time to say that balancing the budget is not borrowing $700 million. Any of you could balance your budget if you got out your credit cards, and that's what Louisiana did under Buddy Roemer.
Mr. Edwards.
I never purchased any airplanes. Dave Treen purchased 2 King Airs. Dave Treen purchased 2 King Airs. I sold a jet. I sold more airplanes than he did. And what he doesn't tell you is that the cost of renting airplanes that he uses is more than the cost of operation of the 2 King Airs. That's a point. Yes, we need evaluation, and yes, the teacher should be involved in it. The problem with Buddy Roemer is that he sat in a little room somewhere with some professor from somebody somewhere and typed up something and said, this is going to look good in the press. We're going to tell 35,000 teachers they have to do it. They didn't want to do it because it wasn't fair and equitable and was not effective. We need to do that, but we need the input and cooperation of the teachers.
Governor, we'll have to leave it right there. Mr. Holloway.
Of course, the purpose of evaluation is to take the worst teachers out. A performance does not take the worst teachers out. I can't believe we spent money coming up with LATEP. I believe that the only way we're going to evaluate teachers is to know what they're doing on a daily basis, to know if they're teaching. Performing will not evaluate a teacher. We're losing good teachers, and we have many, many superior teachers who are prepared to perform one day. I do believe that we have to work with unions. I think we have to. I think it should be totally illegal and not allowed for teachers to go on strike and put our students out in the homes without many parents there today. But I do believe we have to work with and try to fulfill the obligations we have there.
Mr. Roemer.
I believe in teacher evaluation. I think it's critical to hold teachers accountable. We have 46,000 teachers, not 35,000, and most of them are excellent. The 8,000 that were evaluated this last year, 92% of them met the highest standards in America. 30% of them were rated superior. Yes, because we spend $1.7 billion, because we've increased the budget $761 million for teacher pay alone, and they deserve it. We need to hold them accountable and evaluate them. And unions need to be involved. Many of our teachers belong to 3 or 4 unions as a group, and they need to be involved. We'll make this work. We're the last state in America to do it, and we owe it to our children. But our teachers are not the problem.
Governor,
they're the
we'll have
solution.
to leave it right there.
We need to do it right.
Mr. Jones.
Let me tell you why they got it all wrong. Mr. Cody went over to Russia last year to study how to run a school. I don't know what this fixation is about Russia, but I hope we don't send the economic development people there next. I do not believe in centralized government. It's not working over there. We don't need to adopt it here. It should be done, the evaluation should be done locally. If your school boards are not doing their job, ladies and gentlemen, fire them at the next election. Let that principal be the most important person in that school when it comes to evaluation, because he sees or she sees that person come to work every day, how they work, how effectively they work. Let's bring the government back to local people where you have control of it, and away from here where you have no control.
Let me stop you right there.
Thank you.
By the way, members of the reporters on the panel, if you have a follow-up, I would ask that you please ask it to the candidate to whom the question is originally directed. Our next question is from Ms. Nachman, and it is directed to Mr. Duke.
Mr. Duke, under the following scenario, what would you do? Your teenage daughter comes home and tells you that she was raped 6 weeks ago and is now pregnant. The abortion law approved by the legislature this session requires a woman to be examined by a doctor within 5 days and reported to the police within 7 days to be able to consider the option of abortion. If this law was in effect, your daughter has now passed the legal timeline. As a father, what would you do?
Well, I think I'd be faced with, a terrible situation for my daughter's life and for my community. But I do believe in life. I am pro-life, I'm a Christian, and because I'm so, I believe that we should protect life. But I do think that the whole abortion argument is kind of misplaced in Louisiana. I think we've got to start being more concerned about preventing the conceptions to begin with. Rapes are a very tiny portion of the pregnancy problem in Louisiana. We've got to make people more responsible. We've got to help people become more moral. And if we don't have programs to help eliminate and slow down the teenage pregnancy rate, we'll all suffer in Louisiana. So I'm pro-life, ma'am. And in that case, I'd certainly want my child to try to protect the child that was in her. But I also believe in pro-contraception for Louisiana.
Mr. Edwards.
I would offer no recriminations. I would counsel with her as best I could, including offering the services of her minister or priest. Then I would let her make the decision. If under the law she opted to have an abortion and she could not legally do that, then I would take it to some state where it is legally possible to do that. I would also counsel with her to determine whether or not the person responsible for the rape should be reported, and I would encourage her to do that because that kind of criminal activity should be stopped at every possible turn.
Mr. Holloway.
Well, I have to start out by saying I feel it's a living being there. So if it was my daughter, I would go to her and try to counsel with my wife. If she preferred to stay in my home, I would see that everything was offered to her. If not, I would see that she would go to one of the homes that they allow for a pregnant girl. I have to tell you the number one thing that we have to do is prosecute the rapes in this country. We have to get the rapist and not the unborn baby. So I think that I absolutely support life. I support the life of the unborn. I would offer every service I could to my daughter, and then I would try to hope to the Lord that we would prosecute people that do the rapes in this nation because they're the villains out there, not the unborn baby.
Mr. Roemer.
I have vetoed 3 such bills. I will veto all that come to me that don't give a woman, a precious living woman, my daughter or not, a choice when she has been illegally violated. It's common sense. It's the American way. Now, I like the answers I've heard in terms of counseling. It depends on the circumstances with that daughter, with that woman. But she ought to have the choice in those circumstances.
Mr. Jones.
All due respect, ma'am, I do have a daughter. I don't think that is any of your business nor the government's business, what we would do. And that's why I think we've handled the abortion issue all wrong. It should not have gone through the legislative branch. The Bill of Rights was put there by the people of this state, and anything that we do to change the Bill of Rights or add to it should go to all of the people, and it should be decided by one man, one vote, one woman, one vote. My own personal convictions aside from that, we shouldn't play politics with it. We should respect our Constitution, and that's what makes this country what it is, unlike Russia. That's what's so great about what... That's what's so great about it.
Mr. Dent.
Karen, I do in fact have 2 daughters. Both of those daughters have indicated to me that they are pro-choice or a modification of a pro-choice methodology. I would first attempt to hug them and love them, as the case may be, and provide that support and counseling that has already been suggested. The real issue, however, is that the bill that was passed the first time should have been signed. It should have gone to the courts and let the courts decide those very significant and sensitive issues. The Supreme Court gave it to the legislature. The legislature is made up of 144 people, only 4 women. They are not equipped to handle that. If it comes back, I would do like Sam, send it to the vote of the people.
Our next question comes from Carl Redman, and it is directed to Mr. Edwards.
Governor Edwards, we now have the lottery, riverboat gambling, video poker, horse racing. What's next? Are we going to legalize dog racing and casino gambling to help balance the budget?
I met a fella the other day. He told me, you know, Shaq, they told me 4 years ago if I voted for you, we'd have gambling. I voted for you, and we got gambling. Well, certainly, Governor Roemer sending video poker machines into every nook and cranny of Louisiana was not a good idea. It brings no revenue to the state, it creates no jobs, it proliferates gambling. How anyone could say he's against a land-based casino in New Orleans, which would create jobs, would bring $250 million to the state and 3 to 10 million visitors to New Orleans, and then license riverboat gambling and all the other forms of gambling that have been licensed under this non-gambling governor is a mystery to me. I think we've gone far enough, maybe too far. I would still continue to support, if I had the option, and the people of New Orleans still wanted a casino in New Orleans for the reasons which I've just stated.
That's all the time we have.
What about dog racing?
Dog racing? No, I do not support dog racing because I consider that to be too much in competition with the horse racing industry, which is a very important economic factor in our state's economy.
Mr. Holloway.
Gambling is the poorest base we can ever build our state on. We've got to build it on economics. We've got to get the economy of our state moving. Contrary to what my friend to the right says, everything's not good that goes with gambling. We get more crime, we get more hoodlums in our state, we get more people, undesirables. I simply say that the day the lottery came in Simpsport, a man told me a guy came in and spent his whole paycheck on lottery tickets. You say, fine. It takes away from the families of our state. It takes away from the people of our state. The people that can afford it least are the ones that's doing it. I'm opposed to it. I think we've taken the wrong route. I think we should build our state on economics and a strong economy.
Mr. Roemer.
I don't like it either. I don't think it's a way to build a state. The people voted overwhelmingly for a lottery. Went to a vote of the people. More than 70% of them voted for it. So we've started that operation. The video poker we discovered when we took office, there were 10, 12, 15,000 in the state already. Unregulated, nothing we could do about it. It was a regulation bill. I signed it for that purpose. The legislature passed it overwhelmingly. As far as riverboat gambling, Mississippi, Illinois, Iowa now have it. We're in competition with them for tourism. We're going to regulate 15 boats. We have 5 years to see how it works. I think it can work. I hope it can. I hope it means 3,000 to 4,000 jobs a boat and adds tourism. We'll try it and sit on it tight. Dog racing I hadn't heard of.
Mr. Jones.
You know, Carl, they said that if we let the lottery come into Louisiana, the mafia might come in. Could anyone tell me when they left? I would allow local option for a casino in New Orleans or the metro area, as opposed to what Mr. Roemer wants to do as soon as he's reelected, have another tax session, or Governor Edwards wants to do, if he's elected, have a tax convention and ask the people to tax themselves, since he's taxed them so much that he doesn't want to do it anymore himself and probably can't. I would like to see local option. I have no particular penchant for dog racing. I do not gamble myself personally.
Mr. Dent.
What an example we set for the nation when desperate men reach out to do the only thing that they can do creatively and go to the table to roll the dice or buy a lottery ticket to risk the entire future on the roll of dice. But we've done it, and the people voted for it. It is the wrong message to send to this country. We do not want to be another Las Vegas. We do not want to be another Atlantic City. There's got to be more creative ways to raise money for this state than to take money from the poor people who can't afford to do the gambling. I support the local option in terms of the one casino in New Orleans, and if they want to do it on a local option basis, the dog races, I would support that as well in terms of the people voting. But it is a desperate move to make.
Mr. Duke.
The only gamble I know is voting for Governor Edwards or Roemer again in Louisiana. We don't. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to realize, I think people have to be able to do what they want to do in our state, and people have a right to do that. I believe that people have the right to choose whatever they do. But I think there's a lot of abuse going on right now. I've gotten reports all over the state of people going into grocery stores, buying food with food stamps and taking the change and other cash and buying lottery tickets with it. I think that's fraud and abuse, and it needs to be ended in Louisiana. I also believe that the time has come to have programs and policies that prohibit welfare recipients from using lottery tickets in defense and collecting on them in defense of those children that are not getting the help they need and the taxpayers that's being robbed by it.
Our next question is from Chevel Johnson, and it is directed to Mr. Holloway.
Congressman, Louisiana ranks second in the amount of air pollution it pumps into the atmosphere. Should the state's laws be tougher than federal standards, and has the Department of Environmental Quality been overzealous in its enforcement?
Chevel, we would naturally rank second because we're a petrochemical-based state. We have to go the right direction. We're going the right direction. Good federal Clean Air, Clean Water Act will help to see that our state is cleaned up. I don't mind being 49th if we're going the right direction, and every state below us is going the right direction. It means our nation is cleaner. It means our state is cleaner. But we cannot continue to send mixed signals to industry of what we want, or do we want you or do we not want you. I had an alderman the other day to tell me that they can drill a well on land in California today quicker than they can in Louisiana. Economic development is a key in our state. We have to see that our environment is continued to be cleaned up. We have to uphold the laws that we have. Industry is willing to do that. They're spending billions of dollars, and they're going to continue to do it, and it's up to us to see that they continue to do it and meet the guidelines we've given them and create the good $30,000 and $40,000 a year jobs that we have and clean the environment up at the same time. That's time.
Should the state's laws be tougher than federal standards?
Let me just tell you, there's 30 seconds for this answer.
No, I think our federal laws meet the entire nation. I think our federal laws today give us a clear-cut mandate of where we go, sometimes even directions that it's hard to meet. The 90% is easy to meet. The last 10% is tough. It takes new technology. It takes things developing to clean up that last 10%. The Clean Air and Clean Water Act, federal, is a good law. It's a law that industry is willing to live with. It's a law that we should continue to enforce.
Mr. Roemer.
State law should fit the state, regardless of what the nation does. Environment, we used to be the worst. We had the highest unemployment rate in America and the worst air and water. We've begun to improve the air and water. It's going to take a while. We've dropped all the way to second place now. And I notice that 18 states have a worse unemployment rate than we do. Good jobs and good air and water go together. The key word in the environment is balance. When I took this job, there was not one penny of state general fund money spent in the Department of Environmental Quality. Not one penny.
Mr. Jones.
Right now, I was over by the DQ the other day, and someone looked up at the building and said, "How many people working in there?" And it's about half of them. There's a lot more than one penny being spent now, but the question is, are we getting the enforcement that we really need? I don't open the paper and see very often where someone's been cited. I mean, I don't recall where someone's been cited for those violations. And we've moved up one notch from 50th to 49th. Okay, wow. When we catch them and we cite them, it should be a fine big enough to catch their attention. The second time, it should be the death penalty. If they're going to violate someone's groundwater, violate air standards, and cause somebody irreparable damage to their health, they should be taken out of business. Their license should be revoked.
That's time. Mr. Dent.
I don't know anyone, Chevel, that works for a plant that wants to give their life because of the pollution in that plant. I think we ought to be tough and equitable. I have met with people all over the world that have expressed concern about this. I've met with scientists that say, just tell me what you want to do. I can do anything but zero emission. Zero emission shuts us down. What we need is a process that's one that is upfront, involving the people involved in the discussions of that process, and then tough. I closed 69 financial institutions. If they didn't follow the rules, I would be a whole lot tougher and shut them down than the federal government ever would, I can tell you.
Mr. Duke.
The federal requirements right now are plenty tough enough. But what we don't have, what we should have in Louisiana, are laws that keep the massive amounts of toxic and non-toxic waste from coming in and being dumped in Louisiana. We also have to understand, Buddy Roemer keeps saying that he's against pollution and all that. Take a look at his contributor list in this governor's race. All the biggest polluters in the state are contributing to Buddy Roemer. At the same time, DEQ is unfairly harassing small business people, farmers, people in Louisiana who are producing, but don't have the political clout or the political contributions to support the governor.
Mr. Edwards.
Balance is the key word. Governor Roemer is spending, I think, $30 million a year, and I believe 600 or 700 employees, not doing the same thing we were not doing with no employees and no money. Baton Rouge smog levels continue to violate federal standards. We are ranked next to last by 256 indicators in environmental concerns. We need to tighten up and toughen up. And I applaud Governor Roemer for his many statements in that regard. I wish that his action paralleled his words. But we do have a problem. Some of it is my fault, and it goes back generations. But I must say that nothing really substantial has been done in the last 4 years, and I don't suggest that it could have been done. It's a very serious, long-range problem. But whether we should have tougher standards in the feds,
I'm going to have to
I don't
interrupt the
think.
Governor. That's time. Our next question is from Mr. Hill, and it is directed to Mr. Roemer.
All of you have had trouble demonstrating leadership. Governor Roemer, you have been plagued with troubles in dealing with legislators, many of whom have publicly accused you of lying to them. Edwin Edwards, in your last term, you had a history of abdicating leadership, refused to cut the budget, and threw the legislature into chaos. David Duke, in 3 years, you have failed to pass any significant legislation, and any bill carrying your name faces certain death. The rest of you have failed to demonstrate the leadership to rally large numbers of voters to your respective campaigns. Given that, why should the voters have any faith in your leadership?
Who wants to take that first? Oh.
That's Mr. Roemer.
Would you repeat the question? No, well, you know, this legislature is a wonderful, beautiful thing set up by our foremothers and fathers. It's independent. It has its own mind. You have to work with it. I've had to veto $300 million of spending, et cetera, et cetera. 7 out of 8 proposals we sent to the legislature have been passed. 7 out of 8. Some of the most difficult and controversial things in this state's history. Campaign financing law, revision of the Louisiana Health Care Authority to save our charity hospitals, on and on. Talk about environmental regulations. It was a tooth and toenail fight, but we won every time. Leadership, sometimes you have to pound your fists, sometimes you have to open your ears, you have to be involved. We're not perfect, but we've passed more significant pieces of legislation than any administration.
Mr. Jones.
Well, I tell you, deciding whether someone's a leader or not, this election's not over with yet. You know, somebody up here still has the ability to get more votes than everybody else. And presuming that it's over with yet is a mistake that you've made in the media. You know, I just wish, I love Kathleen Blanco to death. She's a very nice person, good friend of mine. If I would have gotten 10% of the free media that she got in this campaign, it may be over with already. But as far as leadership, I've been mayor of Franklin for 10 years through the toughest times. Budget cut in half. We've had 500 votes. I don't have that kind of problem on the city council. I can work with people, and what I say on Monday is the same thing on Friday.
Mr. Dent.
John, you're part of the problem. you and all the other press of this state.
Let me ask that the audience cooperate, please. Thank you.
If you gave Louisiana half a chance, we'd be better off, but all you members of the press do is criticize. You know, the working press years ago used to come up with solutions and forge ideas, but now you have turned over your intellectual capacity to pollsters. I sat with the great Times-Picayune editorial board the other day. 5 men have decided that the ideas of Sam Jones and Fred Dent will not be showcased. It is not us that have the leadership problem, it is you.
Mr. Duke, please. I'd ask you to hold your applause, please. Mr. Duke.
Start my time over. I'd rather be behind a good bill that's crushed by the governor than a bad bill that's passed by the governor. And in the House of Representatives where I work, I had 7 bills last session. Every one of the 7 bills was passed favorably by House committees. 5 of the 7 bills passed the entire body of the House of Representatives. I can work with the legislature. And when I'm governor, I'll work for the right bills, not the wrong bills. I had a bill that provided for equal rights for every Louisianian, that outlawed quotas and set-asides, and said you'd be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin, and Buddy Roemer came down and testified against it. I believe in equal rights, and that's what I'm going to fight for as governor.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards.
Any governor will have a difficult time with the legislature because it's an independent body. As Mr. Wardlaw can tell you, it's an independent body because of reforms that I brought in the late 70s. Maybe too much reform, maybe too much independence. But in spite of the problems that I had, I did work with the legislature, and I'm sure that I can say with a sense of pride that more members of the legislature trust me and want to work with me than anybody else they've ever worked with as governor, including the incumbent. The last thing I want to say, in spite of all the problems that we had, we put $600 million in a special education fund in the last 4 years I was governor. No other state has that size on a per capita basis. That's one of the positive things that can come from joint cooperation between the governor and the legislature.
Mr. Holloway.
John, I would have to tell you that Clyde Holloway's district is considered the toughest district a Republican holds in the United States Congress to be reelected in. I've been reelected there twice. I won in a district that's 7% Republican, 40% black. Tough for a Republican. I led the battle in Congress as a freshman on a very bureaucratic child care bill and took the lead. Very few freshmen have ever taken the lead on a major piece of legislation in Washington. I'm sure as you would like me to be in the lead, I would like to be in the lead. With $500,000, there's no doubt that we would be in the lead. But with the finance reform laws that we have in the state today, it makes it tough for a challenger in a race.
Our next question is from Karen Nachman, directed to Mr. Jones.
Mayor Jones, for the past 3 months, the average unemployment rate in Louisiana has been 7.7%, compared to 6.5% nationally. One major issue in this election is jobs. What specifically is your plan to bring more jobs to the state of Louisiana?
I will not get on the airplane and fly off to Japan every 5 minutes and try to offer them $30 million to come to a place they don't want to be. If anybody wants to, if we should do that with anyone, it should be the people that are already here in business. That's what I did in Franklin with the Main Street program. We helped the people that were already there. We wanted to retain those that were in business. Those are the ones that are more likely to expand and create new jobs. That's the only way it can be done. This idea of running off to the Far East and all that, I only can say one thing about that, and Fred's going to follow me with his Japanese. Buy our rice, we know buy your car, sayonara. We don't need to fool with that anymore. We need to do business with the people that are here. The unemployment in my parish was 28.5% in 1986 when I was 4 years into being mayor. Today it's 7%, and this program had a lot to do with it. We're going to do a trade mission to Faraday or Shreveport or Baton Rouge instead of one to Japan.
Karen, I think we ought to support our small businesses and the mom and pop shops of this state. There are more jobs on Highland Road, probably in Baton Rouge, than we have at Exxon, and I'm certainly not knocking the Exxon plant. We need to have a department for small business, much like we have the Federal Agriculture Extension Department that helps farmers. We need to have a department that goes out and helps the men and women in the small businesses. We need to have in the Department of Small Business a department of scissors to cut red tape. We need to have a one permitting process. We need to have a permitting process that will be attractive and easy to produce and easy to meet the standards of the state for our larger industry. We need to go out and we need to knock on the doors and be a player in the world as well.
Mr. Duke.
Ladies and gentlemen, the way we attract business to Louisiana is by the tax rates. Our tax rate is the highest in the South, a higher rate than even Michael Dukakis' Massachusetts. Of course, that makes sense because Buddy supported Michael Dukakis last time for president. But we have got to realize that high taxes hurt business and the working person in Louisiana. He's raised fees, he's raised licenses, we have more bureaucracy than we've ever had in our state in terms of business in Louisiana. We're not going to bring business into our state or help business or the working person by popping rubber bands or by raising taxes. We've got to keep a lid on taxes, and that will help economic development in Louisiana.
Mr. Edwards.
The 7.7 is deceptive. Thousands have left Louisiana, and additional thousands are no longer on the unemployment compensation rolls, and that gives a deceptive figure. One thing I would not do is meet the Japanese consul in cowboy boots and blue jeans, even if I had to borrow a suit, and I would meet him at the airport and feed him crawfish and make an honorary Cajun out of him before he got to the counters. But I would start out by putting the independent oil companies to work in Louisiana. They are ready to drill, give us jobs, and produce more oil and gas if we'll get the bureaucratic red tape they've been dealing with for the past 4 years out of the way. I would work it with a tax reform convention to provide a better, more stable fiscal reform to provide a more stable tax base for industry, and I think long range that would help.
Mr. Holloway.
Let me start out with saying I am a small business. I have suffered through the last 6 years. That's the answer to our situation here is not more taxes, it's less mandates. We mandate our businesses to death. We have insurance rate, the highest in the nation per capita. Workman comp laws that cannot compete with other states. We have bureaucracy that is created for business. We have to make an environment to where people in Louisiana can do business and grow first. We have to make it where we can bring other industries from around the nation. And I disagree with Mr. Jones. We do have to bring international companies in. But we, number one, have to make an environment where we can make money. We have to use our furs. We have to use our agriculture. We have to use the chemicals, take them to North Louisiana and use them to further process them. A lot can be done. We're a great state.
Mr. Roemer.
I love to listen to politicians talk. Let's look at the record. We've cut unemployment by 40% in the state in the last 4 years. Created 106,000 jobs. That many more people working now than 4 years ago. How do we do it? We're rebuilding our highways. Highway Trust Fund for the first time in the state's history. We're rebuilding our schools, paying teachers better. Business likes that. We've eliminated the inventory tax. We've emphasized tourism. When I took office, the tourism budget was $800,000 for out-of-state advertising. This year, it's $10.3 million. We're working on international trade by rebuilding our ports. We've got a new directions program in the Department of Economic Development.
That's
and
time.
Fred, we've got one-stop
That's
shopping
time.
at the Secretary of
Thank you,
State's
Governor.
office.
Our next question is from Carl Redman, and it is directed to Mr. Dent.
This is a short and sweet question. If you weren't on the ballot on Election Day, who would you vote for?
Let me ask the audience to bear with us.
This is not fair. You don't have to say, Fred.
Can I answer none of the above? I have been a friend of Edwin Edwards since 1959. I have voted for Edwin Edwards many, many times. I have been asked that question before in forums. I would vote for Edwin Edwards.
Mr. Duke.
Let's see. I'd vote for Edwin Edwards as head of gambling. I'd vote for Clyde Holloway as liaison to Congress. I'd vote for Buddy Roemer for rubber band popper extraordinaire. I'd vote for Sam Jones as... I don't think I'd vote for Sam Jones. And I'd have Fred Dent as my man to go around the country and bring economic development to Louisiana.
Mr. Edwards.
But who would you...
Didn't answer the question.
The only follow-up is to the original questionee. Mr. Edwards.
That's such an unrealistic question. I really don't know, but I'll have to say, because I think he is a responsible businessman who's had some experience in state government and who doesn't have any scars or baggage or problems that I know of, that I'd vote for Fred Dent.
Mr. Holloway.
It would be a tough choice. Now, I would vote for Fred Dent also. I think Fred is, and I can only say that I've been on the circuit with him. I know very little about him, but, you know, I would hope that... You don't learn a whole lot at these forums, people. As Buddy said, he hates politicians. I hate to tell you, he's one of the greatest, and there's several other on this stage here. But I would vote for Fred.
Mr. Roemer. Mr. Roemer.
I think Fred's got this thing in a walkaway, doesn't he? Fred, let me take another look at you. Definitely Dent. It is an unrealistic, unreasonable question, Carl. But I'd vote for Sam Jones. I like his humor, and that's important.
Mr. Jones.
Well, that one floored me, I got to tell you. Boy, David, you really become a politician because you didn't answer that question. Fred's is a safe answer.
Our next question. Our next question is from
myself, Carl.
Right. Our next question is from Chevel Johnson and is directed to Mr. Duke.
Representative, Governor Roemer's environmental scorecard has linked an industry's tax break to its environmental record. Opponents argue the two should be separate. Where do you stand on using industrial tax breaks to regulate environmental laws? Be specific.
I think they should be separate. I think we should demand that all industries do what's proper in protecting our environment. I don't think you give people advantages to simply to obey the law and to do good things. I think we need DEQ that will work with industry to help them protect our environment, not work constantly against them and be inconsistent as they have been under the Roemer administration. I know many people in the oil industry who right now tell me that it's harder to drill a well in Louisiana than it is in well-regulated California. You know, I think we're hurting our own industries. We're still allowing toxic waste to come into Louisiana. That needs to be ended. And we've got to start protecting the small guy, the little person in Louisiana who's really being pushed around by an agency that is not really considering their needs and not working with them to protect Louisiana's environment. One more thing. I think we've got to realize the most important environmental concern in Louisiana has got to be stopping the carcinogens that go into our atmosphere and into our waters. This costs us money in terms of public health, hospitals, and a tremendous human cost, and that's our first priority in the environment.
That's time. Mr. Edwards.
They should be separate. The Commerce and Industries Board should look at an incoming industry based upon the number of jobs they will create and how they will stimulate the economic conditions in Louisiana. Once that is determined and the industry determines to come in based upon concessions, then DEQ should immediately step in to see what they propose to do when they're here, what kind of practices they will be following, and make certain that whatever they're doing is in keeping with environmental laws. We need the jobs, we need the industries, but we don't need any more pollutants and we don't need any more polluters, and once they're here, they should be stopped if they're not complying with the law.
Mr. Holloway.
We should build our base first around the industry that's in our state. We can do it with a lot of natural resources that we have without bringing in the polluters. Industry today, it wants to do a good job. They want their employees to be in a good environment, one they can live in. I could not go to someone and tell them that I'm going to run you from the state simply because of one instance or simply because of this. I think that we have to look at their entire history. I think that we've got to look at a lot more than we've looked at to this date. I think the scorecard, to me, is unfair, and I would do away with it.
Mr. Roemer.
These are tax credits. This is the public's money. You're going to separate the public? They have to be together. And we look at it with our scorecard, the first nation in America to do it, 50% credit for the jobs and 50% analysis of what they do in terms of our environmental standards. It's fair. It's not written and granted somewhere. We continue to meet and work it and make it better. But they ought to be together. We've made progress in this state. The legislature calls for massive reduction in toxics. We've raised the hazardous waste tax because, unlike some here, I know the United States Constitution won't let us keep hazardous waste out. So we raised the tax on it so it's cheaper to send it somewhere else. But the scorecard is real and powerful.
That's time. Mr. Jones.
So it's a fundamental problem that we don't really want the Commerce and Industry Board doing the job of DEQ. We just want DEQ to enforce those laws. It's just that simple. One has one responsibility, the other one has the other responsibility, and it just doesn't make any sense to mix the two to me. DEQ should do enforcement, and they should do it soon.
Mr. Dent.
I think that reputable and good companies would like to know what the requirements are. We ought to give them appropriate tax credit for the incentive for what they do to better our environment. We ought to have a scorecard that says if you come in and you do the following things, you get a betterment of rates, if you will. We should also not penalize those companies that are here for what they've done, in many cases unknowingly, but provide incentives for them. You know, Chevel, what we ought to do, we ought to give a tax credit to the men and women that buy trash mashers and compactors too, because that's part of our problem, and help the ordinary family do something with the problem of the trash that we have.
A final question will come from Jack Wardlaw, and it will be directed to Mr. Edwards.
Governor Edwards, historically, to solve crime in Louisiana, we built more prisons, which have been more effective in providing jobs than in alleviating crime. Other states are moving into less costly and more efficient ways of punishing criminals. Given a choice between building a new prison and starting a drug intervention program, where would you put the money and why?
Drug intervention and in education, because I think both of those problems contribute to high crime rates. I might say that the last 4 years I was governor, when I was not doing all those things you questioned me about, we did build 3 new prisons that Governor Roemer is claiming credit for in his TV ads. He canceled 2 other prisons that I bought the land for because his politicians in the area didn't want the prisons. But certainly education, and I would also move immediately, if I could, to some kind of in-house arrest for nonviolent criminals, because that would reduce the cost of housing them and keep from putting these first-time nonviolent offenders in some of these bad situations that they would find themselves in. Those are alternatives that I think we're going to need to look at as prison populations everywhere continue to grow.
Mr. Holloway.
I'd put the money in prisons. I'd put it in tents. I'd put it in barracks. I'd put it in fences, because it's time we let people know you're going to pay for the crime you commit in this state. Sure, we spend it in other states. We've never proved the point that you're going to pay for the crime you commit, because we let most of them go back on the streets. We let most of them beat the police officer back to their house. We let them sell the drugs for make $10,000 and be on the streets again 5 days later selling it. I'm going to build the facilities. I'm going to put the criminals off the streets. I'm going to protect the people. If it takes 6 months in a tent while you're being processed in, I want drug dealers behind fences. 40% of our prisoners are eligible for boot camps. Let's put them in boot camps. We save $750,000 for every 100 prisoners. I say let's get them off the streets for a while and quit worrying about bureaucracy.
Mr. Roemer.
We need to do both. And it's a tough struggle. We've opened new prison cells. We now pay 100% supplemental pay to police officers. We've had graduating class in the state police and added to the number of the troopers on the road. We've had 5 executions since I've been governor the last 3.5 years. We've spent more money on drugs. We've expanded the education program. We're under federal court order run by a federal judge, which we've been under for years that I'd like to get out from under, but we need to do both. Drug intervention, we work with the feds to do that, education, and tough prison sentences and places to put them.
That's the time. Mr. Jones.
I would come up with the money for both, and I'd start by abolishing the pardon board, the same pardon board that they had under Edwin Edwards that was selling pardons and now giving them away under Buddy Roemer. There's not really any difference between them. Here's a picture of a gentleman that Mr. Roemer pardoned who took $100,000 from the Head Start program lunch program in St. Mary Parish by the name of James Ducote. Got a full-fledged pardon from Mr. Roemer. He's out campaigning for him today. Not a dime's worth of difference between them. We need to make a full commitment if we're going to do this, and we need to do it right. And we need to build more prisons. We need to have prisoners out on the highways picking up trash. We need to have a rehabilitation process to where all of that goes on the way it used to go on, where there is something given back to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
I would
Dent.
like to go somewhere between that answer, if I can, John, and say we need to do something for the people that suffer from the disease of alcohol and substance abuse. Of all the questions that we get on the road, we never are asked, what are you going to do for the good people that have this serious disease? One of my sons suffered from that problem. I had to take my son to Greenville Springs Hospital with the adolescent center that they had there at one time. We don't have those treatment facilities today. I would mount a massive program, much like they've done in the state of Texas, to provide treatment to the ordinary men and women and children that suffer from not only the cause, but the effects.
Mr. Duke.
Ladies and gentlemen, Buddy Roemer's television commercials right now are telling us that he's had 6 executions of murderers in Louisiana. Only problem is we've had 2,000 murders in Louisiana or more over the last 4 years. Until we begin to execute more than 6, more innocent people are going to suffer in our state. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to spend, the first priority of government's got to be to get criminals off the streets and behind bars where they belong. One lady in my district was accosted by some criminals. The local sheriff deputies grabbed him, put him up against the wall and said, "Are you crazy? Don't you realize you're in David Duke's district?" Maybe we can say that once I'm governor all over the state of Louisiana and get the criminals off the street.
Our next round of questioning in the debate this evening will be among the candidates themselves. Names as well as order were drawn by lot. Each candidate will direct his question to only one other candidate. There will be no follow-up questions, no rebuttals. Each candidate gets 30 seconds to ask his question. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Our first question will be from Mr. Jones, directed to Mr. Holloway.
Clyde, I've really come to like you a lot, and it's been a great pleasure meeting you and all. I believe greatly in our Constitution. I believe in the Bill of Rights. I believe very much in how it got to be there: freedom of the press, right to bear arms, right to trial by jury. Why wouldn't you let the men and women of this state have the opportunity to vote on the abortion issue and put it in the Bill of Rights where it belongs, however they decide it should be?
Sam, many people say that we have no right to legislate morality. We can't legislate morality. I do not necessarily disagree, but I do say that when we were a nation that was addressing these issues, we were a greater nation. We had more morals. We had more concepts of what life is all about. We didn't have all the murders that we have on the streets as well as the abortion. So I have to tell you that I live with the issue I stand on. It's a living being. It deserves to be protected as well as you deserve to be protected, or as well as anyone in this audience deserves to be protected. It's a living being. And I want to see the day that the Supreme Court rules it a living being. I want to see the day that the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade. I want to see the day that fetus can be considered the human being that it's going to be when it comes out of its mother's womb. So I simply say that there are issues that, to me, that I have to live with, I have to sleep with at night, things that I truly believe in. My sincerity is there regardless of what people think. It's an issue that we have to protect that unborn child.
Our second question will be from Mr. Duke. Our second question will be from Mr. Duke, and it is directed to Mr. Jones.
Sam, I'm not going to ask you a tough one. Don't worry. Right now in Louisiana, there is discrimination going on against people because of their race, in hiring, promotions, scholarships. In fact, for a lot of people, when you take a test for a job or a promotion or scholarship, if you're of a particular race, they'll lower your test score. If you're of another race, they'll raise the test score. I don't think that's fair and right and just. Roemer and Edwards both have stood up for affirmative action. Roemer testified in favor of a minority set-asides in committee with me, and both are members of the NAACP. Are you an NAACP member, and do you agree with affirmative action and quotas?
I do not belong to the NAACP, the NAAWP, the NAZI. I do not belong to Bowl, Soul, Coop, Boop, Bip, or Bop. I've been too busy just trying to make a living like everybody else in this state, working 2 or 3 jobs, unlike you, David, who's never had a job in his life. But let me answer your question directly. I'll give you a tough answer for an easy question. I do not favor affirmative action on a race-based condition. I do believe affirmative action like the Taylor Plan for Education, where a young person who's got good grades in high school, who can't afford to go to college, should be given the opportunity regardless of their station in life and regardless of what color they are.
Our third question is from Mr. Edwards, directed to Mr. Roemer.
We now know that your 1987 campaign was based on a string of broken promises, no new taxes but new taxes, scrubbing the budget, but it went up $2.5 billion. Lowering state employees, they've gone up 2,000 or 5,000. Bricking up floors of a building, which you've probably never been in. Now your television ads are saying you lowered student-teacher ratios 20-1, when only 30% of the classrooms have that. You're saying you raised teacher pay raise 30%, it's only 19%. You claim you built 2,000 jail cells, which you didn't. Why should we believe you now?
Because the facts as we state them happen. Number one, teacher pay has gone up 3 consecutive years. 19.9% rock bottom, plus longevity pay, average 30%. In addition, this year, superior teachers with 7-year service got a 10% pay raise in addition to that. We cleaned off 3 floors of the Department of Education, 207 employees gone, and took other agencies that were scattered around this town renting space and put them there, saving the taxpayers money. In terms of our crime effort, we've completed more than 2,000 prison cells and added to old prisons. In addition to that, we're building 2 juvenile detention centers. You know, most of the crime in this state is committed by people 17 years and under. It's a first for Louisiana. The reason you can believe what I say is because we do it.
That's time. Our fourth question is from Mr. Roemer. It is directed to Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Edwards, we all say things occasionally that we wish we could take back or say in a different way. 4 years ago in a debate in this room, you answered a student's question in a most cold and uncaring way. He asked you what you would say to the young people who were leaving Louisiana because the state under your leadership was a mess. Highest unemployment rate in America, huge deficits, teachers paid last, bad roads, headlines of political corruption, and no environmental balance. You answered, in effect, goodbye. That's their right to leave. How would you answer that question now that our children are beginning to come home and that you've had 4 years to think about it?
I would say move out the state because Buddy Roemer will send for you. He's bringing people from all over the country back into Louisiana for jobs. On a serious note, I made a mistake. I was frustrated. You were lying to the people 4 years ago. They believed you then. They've learned since that you were telling lies because of all the things you've done since you got elected governor. I was frustrated and unhappy, and I made a mistake. I should not have said what I said. I regret that I said it. And to those who heard it, I offer my sincere apology and hope that you understand in the press of a campaign, sometimes we say things that we should not say. We lose our better sense of judgment and sometimes our sense of humor. And for that, I apologize.
Our fifth question is from Mr. Holloway. It is directed to Mr. Dent.
Fred, you served both in the Edwards administration. I assume you served scandal-free. I don't think I remember your name being mentioned. And you've served in the Roemer administration. You've left the Roemer administration. Would you just simply tell us why you left the system?
I was appointed by Edwin Edwards in January of 1987. My term expired in January of 1991. In the ensuing period of time, Governor Roemer and I had a disagreement that was blown out of proportion by the press, as they have a tendency to do. We worked at that agreement. My wife said it was time to get back to my business. I went back to my business, and somebody asked me the other day, Clyde said, "Do you miss your job?" I said, "No, I don't miss the job, but I do miss the people."
Our final question is from Mr. Dent and is directed to Mr. Duke.
David, as we've traveled all over the state, you have been accused of having an awful lot of baggage. You are a former member of the Nazi Party. You are a former Ku Klux Klanman, by your own admission. You at times have made statements like that you did not believe that the Holocaust happened. You have received international press what would you do specifically to improve the image of Louisiana if you were governor, and how would you overcome those particular comments?
First of all, you're incorrect on one thing. I was never a member of any Nazi group. I certainly made a mistake by picketing William Kunstler one time, the communist, when he came out here. I believed in victory for our soldiers in Vietnam, not like William Kunstler did. He believed in victory for the Viet Cong. I certainly was in the Klan, and I've certainly made mistakes in my life. I've never been accused of ever hurting someone physically, minority or otherwise, ever in my life. I've certainly been intolerant before in my life. But those who would condemn and point their fingers at me, I'd like them to look in their own lives and ask if they'd never hurt a friend or changed their opinions. I'm a Christian. I believe in Christianity. I believe we're made new in Christ every day, and I've stood up for our beliefs and the ideas that will make Louisiana better. What would I do to improve Louisiana's image? I'd improve Louisiana's reality. Tourists being shot down on our streets, political corruption, taxes that stifle businesses here and the ones that would come in, that's what hurts Louisiana. We've got to get a governor who's going to work and stand up for what's right in this state, honestly and openly, and that's what I'll do as governor.
The next part of the program this evening, in the next part of the program this evening, we will have closing remarks from each of the candidates. Each candidate will receive 2 minutes. We will reverse the order, and we will begin with Mr. Holloway.
I grew up in a very poor rural home, but I grew up in a home that knew what standards and what morality, what working for your living, supporting one wife, living with one wife, not leaving the children that I bring into the world to support them. I got into politics out of frustration. I got into politics because I was not satisfied with what was going on, was working. I was a small business person getting beat up on every day by big government, by government that doesn't answer to the people of this state, government who does not answer the people of this nation. I don't know how our pioneers would have crossed the plains of this country and invented the things they invented without the bureaucracy we have today. We wouldn't be where we at if we had the bureaucracy back then. I have to tell you, I get tired of phony politicians that we look at and listen at them tell things to you that they can tell you a little bit about what they've done, but they've failed. They've missed the whole issue they're looking at. I think it's time that we as Louisianans look up to someone to be governor of Louisiana. Look up to someone that can lead our state and lead our children. Look up to someone who stands for something today and stands for the same thing tomorrow, that we don't have to change. I haven't had to change to run this race. That's very few of the others here that hasn't had to change to run for political office in this country. I tell you today that there's a need for true leadership. Leadership from someone who doesn't want to make a career out of politics, someone who wants to have a life after politics, someone who wants to go back to his family, enjoy the good wife and the children that I have at home, and the good life in the business that I have. So I have to tell you that we have to look way above what you hear in a forum like this and what you see. Look at the record of people. Look at where they stand. Go talk or listen to what you read about from their community and vote for the person that you think can lead this state the right direction for now and for our children's future. Thank you.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, you have 2 minutes.
There's a growing scandal of politically connected lawyers reaping huge benefits on state legal contracts. You've read about it in the press lately. Until this year, Dave Treen had never participated. According to the State Times, he was awarded a legal contract with the Department of Revenue valued at about $300,000 just a few weeks before he endorsed Buddy Roemer on September the 5th. Roemer and his aides said it was a coincidence. I have another one. I don't have the time to give you all the details, but I prepared a dossier for the press which details and chronicles everything I'm going to say here, including copies of all the letters and correspondence. What happened was on the 29th day of April 1991, following a meeting between Dave Treen and Buddy Roemer, the Division Administration assigned a contract to Dave Treen to represent the state in a case and pay him $150 an hour for a total of $500,000. Other attorneys capable of doing the job were doing that for $85 an hour. A special exception was made for Dave Treen, but then they had to raise the fee of the other attorneys to accommodate him. This $500,000 contract was given to Dave Treen just 3 days before he joined with Buddy Roemer to try to scuttle the Republican convention to rob this man of the endorsement. And then on September the 5th, he endorsed Buddy Roemer. The division administration had already refused to raise the fees of other lawyers from $85 to even $100. They had turned down the first request to appoint Dave Treen to the contract because it was inappropriate. Under pressure from the governor's office, they finally relented, and this is all in writing, and agreed to go along with it at $100 an hour. But under further pressure, it was raised to $150 an hour. And given the rate at which Dave Treen works, that's like paying him $300 an hour because he goes at half speed. Ladies and gentlemen, Buddy Roemer spent $500,000 of your money to pay Dave Treen for an endorsement. I asked the press, the Attorney General, and our great Inspector General to look into it. Brother, they'd have done it if I had been the governor.
Mr. Duke, you now have 2 minutes.
Edwin, you're right about Buddy, but talking about his political corruption, isn't that kind of like calling the kettle black? Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about what we haven't talked about here. I want to talk about the greatest single problem in Louisiana that affects your tax rates, that affects your crime rate, that affects your medical care, that affects your insurance costs, and that affects your education costs and quality in Louisiana. We have a welfare system in our country and in our state that's not working. We have got to help people escape the cycle of poverty they're being locked into. Right now, they're having children out of wedlock with no present loving father, born into a climate of drugs and crime. That's got to end. I believe we've got to reform the welfare system. I think it's time in Louisiana that we require the able-bodied welfare recipient to do work for their welfare checks in Louisiana. I think it's time. I think it's time in Louisiana. If we can have drug testing for people who work for a living, how about drug testing for people on welfare in Louisiana? Let's clean up the system. And finally, we've got to encourage welfare recipients to be responsible and not bring children into the world in these terrible conditions for their benefit and for the taxpayers' benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, our social welfare system is altogether wrong. We have elderly women and elderly men retired in this state living on $350 a month. Sometimes they can't turn on their air conditioners in the summer or their heaters in the winter. We have people not getting the medical care they need. But somehow we've got a welfare system that says, don't work, we'll pay for it. And this system's growing every day and every hour. It's going to overwhelm all of us unless we change it. It's the source of most of our crime. It's the source of many problems in education. We've got to address it. It has not been addressed yet by government. I will address that problem as your governor. I will get the corruption out of the welfare system, get the cheaters off the rolls, and give people incentives to work and be responsible. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have that, and let's have equal rights for every Louisianian under the David Duke administration as governor. Thank you.
Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, you have 2 minutes.
As the principal choice for the other candidates for governor to be governor, I think that makes a very interesting point. As I travel around the state and say hello to people from all walks of life, you know what I hear? I hear we need something better than a bad choice for governor. Louisiana needs and requires something more than that bad choice. And let me tell you what they say. We need a governor who would rather be in Louisiana than hobnobbing with the fat cats of the Republican Party in Washington, D.C., and the Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle. We need something better than an ex-governor who said, laissez le Baton Rouge, let the good times roll. And we need something better than an ex-Klansman who said, let's forget our past. I have heard that so much, ladies and gentlemen, that we actually now pass out nose clips because what people have said, they just hate to have to go in the voting machine and hold their nose. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to do that. There are viable alternatives. The real issue in the campaign is that the press of Louisiana gave us Buddy Roemer 4 years ago, 5th in the polls, doomed to defeat, moved forward by the press. They are doing everything that they can to protect this man. They're telling you that it is a race of only 3 men. I tell you, the people say it's time. We've had enough leftovers. They're tired of leftovers. The press doesn't understand that the public is saying, we don't want the leftovers from the mansion, the leftovers from Congress, and the leftovers from the Ku Klux Klan. They've had enough. Ladies and gentlemen, the Wall Street Journal said it best, Bayou politics, quirky candidates and critical issues. They did not mention my name, by the way. My name is Fred Dent. I would like to ask you for your vote, your support, and your prayers. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, you have 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard tonight that there's really not a dime's worth of difference between Buddy Roemer and Edwin Edwards. Buddy Roemer grew up in the mansion with his father employed by Edwin Edwards and learned all he knows from Edwin Edwards. Almost all he knows, except for what he learned at Harvard. And I hadn't figured out what that is yet. David Duke had to go all the way to Mississippi to bus in one black person. He couldn't find one black person in all of Louisiana that would sit on television and endorse him. And I thought he was against busing. Ladies and gentlemen, my father left my mother when I was 8 years old. I made a choice to get a job. I've had one every day of my life since then. We never collected food stamps or welfare, anything like that. We worked hard, really hard, 2 and 3 jobs, like many of you have to do. I'm saying all of this fun and games, it's time for it to end. You have to vote now. I have been doing very well of late, and you know that. People are starting to decide who they're going to vote for, and a lot of them are voting for Sam Jones. The Ponchatoula Times endorsed me yesterday, one of the first newspapers in the state to make an endorsement. I encourage you to look at the record and start talking to your friends. You're not going to get too much more information in this election. You've been fortunate to get it tonight. You've been able to see us in action. I cut the budget of my town in half. Not half based on inflation, but half in reality. I've struggled, scraped, scratched, just like you do. I'm willing to come to Baton Rouge. I want to come to Baton Rouge. Not so much that I want to have the trappings of the office or ride in one of those limos. You could sell them all. I want the job. I want the job to work with you, struggle with you, and rebuild this state. I know I can do it. Please help me. Please vote for me. And talk to your friends and ask them to do the same thing.
Finally, Mr. Roemer, you have 2 minutes.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the people of Louisiana for letting me be your governor. I jokingly say I was 6'4" and 235 when I started. I'm 5'7.5" and 150 now. It's been tough, but it's been a lot of fun, and we've made a lot of progress, and I thank you for your help. It's been tough because of the politics. You've heard some of it tonight, and Mr. Edwards, you should know the big contract you referred to was done by the Attorney General. I agree with it completely. He decided that the state had a $450 million vulnerability from ag loans made under your watch, and he picked the firm he wanted to defend the state of Louisiana. Number 2, we're one of the first states in America to have welfare reform. In 10 parishes of this state, if you're on AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, you must get trained for a job and take the first job that comes. I remember 4 years ago. Now, I'm not much of a politician, but I remember. Worst roads in America, highest unemployment rate in America, the worst rated bonds in America, an environment where we were spending no money at all, headlines of political corruption almost daily. We paid our teachers 49th in America. Since that time, 100,000 more jobs, 40% less unemployment, bond rating up 2 steps, budget balanced every year. Second lowest individual state taxes in the South. Teacher pay up 3 years. Average classroom size, K through 3, from 22 per teacher down below 20 for the first time in the state's history. The key to our future is not our politics. It's our children and the education system. My commitment is, as it's always been, children first. We can't lose Louisiana. Children first.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It is. Gentlemen, we'd like to thank all of you very much. It has been a very lively debate, especially at the very beginning this evening. We would again like to thank the LSU Ideas and Issues Committee and the LSU Union Theater for their help and cooperation this evening. We thank you for joining us here in the LSU Union Theater and on television. We hope that you have learned something from the proceedings this evening. For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, have a good evening.